Gittin Erev Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers. Let's light up the darkness. We have to be efficient today. Lots of ground to cover. Who's in the house? Sharon in New Jersey, Joseph, Massachusetts, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Shandor in the Bronx, Paula taking notes in the house, Gordo in Scotland. Where am I? Nancy, North Carolina, Rain in Indiana, Joe in the Inland Empire. Can't wait to get started after last night's cliffhanger. Leona in Southern Illinois, David in South Bend, Paula, Karen in California, and Ella and Marjorie in Georgia, and Michelle. Welcome, everybody. All right. So, our daf today is page 57, right? So Nun Zion here in Tractate Gittin, the 19th volume of the Talmud. We are in chapter 5, continuing our discussion, of Mishna number 6. Now, we got into this section because the sages had to deal with certain legal matters that during this great war, and they meant the war that culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem and specifically the Holy Temple at the hand of the Romans, but that war took some time to play out, and there were different phases of that war in terms of these people, these thugs, the Sicarii, who would intimidate landowners and force them to turn over the deeds of their land. And then these Sicarii would turn around and sell the land to other locals at a discount price just so they could get some money and go on their way. And that had certain legal ramifications for the transfer of property. But once we started talking about the war, the sages related the story of that war, not so much on the political, historical, social level, but much more in the human dimension. And we brought it on ourselves, right? The spiritual level of the people had sunk, and we didn't merit to have the temple in our midst anymore. But how it actually came about was this unbelievable, small story of a guy throwing a big party, and he wanted to invite his friend Kamsa, but his servants extended the invitation to the host's enemy, Bar Kamsa. And so Bar Kamsa came to the party. The host said, "What are you doing here? I don't want you here." The guy said, "Okay, listen, I'm here. Don't embarrass me by throwing me out. I'll pay for whatever I eat." "No, get out." "I'll pay for half the cost of the whole party." "No, get out." "I'll pay for the whole party, even though I wasn't invited. Just don't embarrass me by throwing me out of here." And the host said no and threw him out physically. And there were sages present at that party, and for whatever reason, they didn't say anything. And the man who was humiliated, this is how dangerous and awful it is to humiliate a person, he was so angry about it, not rightfully so, right? But nevertheless, it's terrible to embarrass or humiliate anybody, that he decided that, he became an enemy to his own people. The sages, in this case, represented to him his people, the Jews, and he orchestrated this event where he invited the emperor of Rome to send an offering to the Holy Temple. And this man, Bar Kamsa, caused a blemish in that offering, this choice calf, such that the Romans would not consider it a blemish. They would have offered that calf to their own gods, but according to Jewish law, it could not be offered up on the altar, so the priests in the temple rejected the calf, and one thing led to another, and this triggered the war that ultimately led to the destruction of the temple. Yesterday, in case you missed that class, you definitely want to go back and listen to it. It's the whole story of Yochanan ben Zakkai and how, he escaped from Jerusalem and asked Vespasian, who he predicted would become the emperor and did become the emperor at that very moment. And Vespasian said, "I can't grant you to spare Jerusalem or the Holy Temple, but ask me something I can give you." And Yochanan ben Zakkai said, "Give me Yavne and its sages." And that's how the oral tradition and basically Judaism was saved in this terrible period. And it would be the sages relocating and the Sanhedrin relocating to Yavne, this small town near the coast, where the sort of seat of rabbinic Judaism would continue, and where the sages would figure out what Judaism and Torah Judaism would look like in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple, when we could no longer fulfill our obligations, bringing offerings and gaining atonement through the offerings, and prayer and other practices would replace what the temple had meant in our midst. So that was all yesterday. But this whole story was introduced by Rabbi Yochanan, who said at the bottom of page 55b, Rabbi Yochanan said, "What is the meaning of that which is written? Happy is the man who fears always, but he who hardens his heart shall fall into mischief." And he says, Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. The place known as the King's Mountain was destroyed on account of a rooster and a hen, which we'll be talking about today. And the city of Beitar, which we'll also discuss today, was destroyed on account of a shaft from a chariot. And we also saw that Titus, who waged war against God, was ultimately destroyed by a gnat. So we have a couple of themes going on that, big worldwide events can get started through very small little relationships between people. In fact, put Titus and his gnat aside. But the three examples that Rabbi Yochanan gave, right, that Jerusalem was destroyed because this little petty grievance between the host of the party and Bar Kamsa. One might ask, why does it say Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa? Bar Kamsa caused all the disaster. Kamsa never received his invitation to the party. Why is he part of it? Because he was part of a society where all these grievances were festering and where peace was not promulgated, and that's what led to all of this. And so Rabbi Yochanan is saying, that huge consequences, huge tragedies can ensue when we don't treat each other on a human level with basic kindness. Right? These little disputes can escalate completely out of control. Right, in the American South, there's this famous feud, right? The Hatfields and the McCoys. That generation after generation after generation, these families were feuding and killing each other. Does anybody remember what the fight began about? Who knows, right? But people just separate themselves into camps, and hatred festers of people who are on the other side, whether it's political divisions, religious divisions, social divisions. There's so many different ways that we can divide ourselves up and then justify that we don't have to be polite to those people. They're on the other side, right? And Rabbi Yochanan is saying, no. Right? The way you want to be treated by others, you have to treat them, and no matter what camp they stand or sit in, right, you've got to extend that basic human kindness to your brothers and sisters, or look what kind of tragedies can ensue. All right, we picked this up at the bottom of 56b, and where we finished yesterday was with the destruction of Jerusalem, right? And Yochanan ben Zakkai escaped. He gets Yavne and its sages. The one who destroyed the temple, Titus, the general Titus, he was eventually destroyed by a gnat that God sent to fly up his nose and eat out his brain for years and years and years. So when the Jewish people stray, eventually God punishes us. But how does he punish us? Does he send sulfur and brimstone from the sky like he did to Sodom and Gomorrah? No, he orchestrates the events of this world. And often there is an agent, right, of his destruction. But woe unto the Jews, when God is angry with us, and woe unto the person or people or army that serves as the instrument of God to rebuke and to punish the Jewish people, because it never ends well for them. You don't want to be the instrument with which God punishes the Jewish people. And Titus had a very, very miserable end to his life. Okay, so the Gemara relates that Onkelos bar Kalanikos, the son of Titus' sister, Titus who destroyed the temple and had that awful ending for himself. So the son of Titus' sister, right, Titus' nephew, Onkelos. wanted to convert to Judaism. And he went and raised Titus from the grave through necromancy and said to Titus, who is the most important in that world where you are now, right? The afterlife. And Titus said to him, the Jewish people. The Jewish people are on top, right? We're the lowliest, most persecuted people in this world. But, and all the Jews who don't follow Judaism are going to have to make an accounting for that. But nevertheless, God has a covenant with the Jewish people. And when we all arrive in the world of truth, we'll see what the meaning of that covenant was. And for everybody that did what they were supposed to do in this world, not that we're all perfect, none of us are, but at least if you're trying, if you're learning, if you're doing mitzvahs, and even if you're not Jewish, right, but you're doing the commandments that are given to all of humanity, the Noahide commandments, there's a reward for that in the afterlife. Okay, so Onkelos is finding out from Titus, who really defied God and was punished for it, and now he's in the next world. So Onkelos is asking him, who is on top in that world? And Titus says, the Jewish people. So Onkelos says to him, well, should I then attach myself to the Jewish people in this world? And Titus said to him, their commandments are numerous, and you will not be able to fulfill them. It is best that you do something different. Go out and battle against the Jews in that world, in this world where we live, and you will become the chief, as it is written. Her adversaries have become the chief. That's from Lamentations 1:5, which means, according to Titus, anyone who distresses, Metzer, anyone who distresses Israel will become the chief, right? It's a cheap and easy way to achieve prominence is to be a big, virulent, public anti-Semite. How will it end for you? Not good, but it's a cheap and easy way to achieve some prominence. So Onkelos said to Titus, well, yeah, you're telling me I'll become the chief in this world, but what is the punishment of that man, meaning Titus himself, in the next world? And Titus said to him, that which he decreed against himself, right? We saw yesterday that Titus, before his death, said, when Titus was dying, he said to his attendants, burn that man, meaning himself, and scatter his ashes across the 7 seas so that the God of the Jews should not find me and stand me for judgment. Now, Onkelos, through necromancy, is talking to Titus in the next world and saying, well, what is your ultimate punishment in the next world? And Titus said, that which he decreed against himself, meaning that which I decreed against myself, as Titus undergoes the following. Every day his ashes are gathered, and then they judge him, and then they burn him again, and then they scatter him over the 7 seas. Not a good ending to spend eternity doing that. Onkelos then went and raised Bilam, the prophet Bilam that we encountered in the Torah portion just a few weeks ago, right? The prophet Bilam, whom the king Balak had brought and said, please curse the Jewish people for me. And Bilam wanted to curse the Jewish people, but he was an actual prophet, and God did not want to curse the Jewish people when the children of Israel were in the wilderness, right, with Moses and Joshua. And so Bilam was not able to curse, and in fact, he blessed. But it was also Bilam who gave the Moabite king the idea, well, I can't curse them, but if you bring young, beautiful, women, priestesses of your idolatrous religion, to seduce the young men of Israel, then you can pick off a bunch of them and cause big problems for them, and that's what they did. So now, Onkelos went and raised Bilam from the grave. Now we're in 57a, and he did that through necromancy, and Onkelos said to Bilam, who is the most important in the world where you are now? And Bilam said to him, the Jewish people. Onkelos asked him, should I then attach myself to them here in the world? And Bilam said to him, you shall not seek their peace or their welfare all the days. And you can see Deuteronomy 23:7 about this. And Onkelos said to him, what is the punishment of that man, Bilam, in the next world? And Bilam said to him, he, meaning himself, Bilam, is cooked in boiling semen, as he caused Israel to engage in licentious behavior with the daughters of Moab, right? So quid pro quo, that he sought to entice the Jews to sin, through sexual licentiousness, and that's how he's punished, to burn in boiling semen for eternity. Onkelos then went and raised Yeshu HaNotzri. Now, this Yeshu HaNotzri is translated as Jesus the Nazarene, and you should immediately know that this is not the Jesus on whom the Christian religion is based. This is the same Jesus the Nazarene whom we encountered. It was in Tractate Sota on page 47a, and this was a disciple of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia, who kind of spoke very rudely to his teacher, Rabbi Yehoshua, and Rabbi Yehoshua excommunicated him. And then this Yeshu tried to come back to his teacher a bunch of times, and his teacher was not ready to, remove the excommunication. And finally, this Yeshu despaired of ever coming back, and then he became an enemy of the Jewish people and caused all kinds of problems. And the reason we know that Yeshu is not identified with Jesus of the Christian religion is because the latest that story could have happened was in the year 76 before the Common Era. So these are different individuals. So Onkelos then went and raised Yeshu HaNotzri from the grave through necromancy. And Onkelos said to him, "Who is most important in that world where you are now?" And Yeshu said to him, "The Jewish people." Onkelos asked him, "Should I then attach myself to the Jewish people in this world?" And Yeshu said to him, "Their welfare you shall seek, their misfortune you shall not seek, for anyone who touches them is regarded as if he were touching the apple of his eye," right? The apple of God's eye. You try to attack the Jewish people, it will not go well for you. You might succeed briefly, in the long run it will not work for you. Onkelos said to Yeshu, "What is the punishment of that man," of Yeshu himself, "in the next world?" And Yeshu said to him, "He is punished with boiling excrement. As the master said, anyone who mocks the words of the sages," which is what Yeshu did, "will be sentenced to boiling excrement." And this was his sin, as he mocked the words of the sages. And the Gemara comments, "Come and see the difference between the sinners of Israel and the prophets of the nations of the world, as Bilam, who was a prophet, wished harm upon Israel, whereas Yeshu HaNotzri, who was a Jewish sinner, sought their well-being." Even as he's being punished in the next world. And to conclude the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa and the destruction of Jerusalem, the Gemara cites a Baraisa. It was taught, Rabbi Elazar says, "Come and see how great is the power of shame, for the Holy One, blessed be He, assisted Bar Kamsa, who had been humiliated, and due to this humiliation and shame, he destroyed his temple and burned his sanctuary." Right? Again, the Jews had brought it on themselves through a diminishing spirituality, for decades or centuries. But in the end, the trigger for that destruction was this incident that involved the humiliation of Bar Kamsa, and this led to so much suffering for so many people. We've seen it elsewhere. It is better to jump into a burning furnace than to humiliate another person. We also learned that from the story of Judah and Tamar. Now, about this Yeshu HaNotzri, who mocked the words of the sages, we have from, as stated by Rambam, this is an important halakha, an important Jewish law. It is a great sin to disgrace Torah scholars, and anyone who does so has no portion in the world to come. Now, this is a very strong statement. What does it mean, somebody who mocks the words of the sages? What does it mean, somebody who humiliates or disgraces the sages of Israel? That's a much longer discussion for another day. I'd have to, read what Maimonides actually meant by this. There are just many Jews who have completely wandered away from Judaism in the world, and it's a shame. They rejected something that they don't even know. Nina and I often liken this to somebody who, has only tried bad 3-day-old sushi from the supermarket. Says, "Oh, that tastes terrible. Sushi sucks," right? And they never tasted really amazing, tasty, fresh sushi. So they got some watered down version of Judaism. They said, that's boring, that's bad, and they wandered away from it, and they didn't even know what they were rejecting. Okay, so, Judaism is not for them, and it's a very sad thing. And, something we do here at Accidental Talmudists and other organizations like Chabad and Aish are trying to, bring Judaism in all its truth and excitement so that people can get a taste of what it is they've been missing. And God, God willing, we'll all be successful in that. More Jews will find their way back to Torah. So it's one thing to just be disconnected. It's another thing where you find, Jews in the world and in the public sphere, and prominent people, not just saying Judaism is not for them, but mocking Judaism and just associating it with, some kind of backward troglodyte, ill-conceived, phony baloney set of truths that are used by one people to oppress another. And so when Jews start mocking Torah and mocking Judaism, according to this teaching, they're very much endangering themselves, not only in this world, but in eternity. So please, God, open the eyes of such people that they realize they should not be mocking the tradition that we revere so much. Okay, we go back. Now, Rabbi Yochanan gave 3 examples, right, of this idea that we have to remain ever vigilant in our conduct, and be kind and not just allow little petty grievances to escalate. So one was the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So what's the second example? It was previously mentioned at the bottom of page 55b that the place known as the King's Mountain, Tur Malka, was destroyed on account of a rooster and a hen. So what was this little event that escalated into a great tragedy? The details of what happened are as follows. And this place, Tur Malka, by the way, was kind of a large valley where the Hasmonean kings tended to have their own private estates. So it was customary in that region that when they would lead a bride and groom to their wedding, they would take out a rooster and a hen before them, as if to say, in the manner of a good omen, be fruitful and multiply like the chickens. One day, a troop of Roman soldiers passed by there while a wedding was taking place and took the rooster and hen from them. The residents of the city fell upon the Roman soldiers and beat them. Okay, now this is not a case of, like petty grievances among Jews, right? This was more a case of giving in to rage when it was not wise to do so. So the residents of the city fell upon the Roman soldiers and beat them. How can they do this to us? Now, somebody should have said to them, listen, it sucks that they took our a chicken and a rooster, but they represent the Roman government that is super powerful and oppressing us, and things are very tense right now between Israel and Rome. Maybe we should just let it go, right? But they gave in to their rage. So the soldiers came and said to the emperor, the Jews have rebelled against you. Right? That war, had its ups and downs. It wasn't just one constant campaign the whole time. So this was sort of another theater of that same war. So the soldiers came and said to the emperor, the Jews have rebelled against you. And the emperor then came against them in a war. Among the residents of the King's Mountain, this region, there was a certain man named Bar Deroma, who could jump the distance of a mill, which is like a mile. And he killed many of the Romans who were powerless to stand up against him. The emperor then took his crown and set it on the ground as a sign of mourning. And oddly, the Roman emperor says, Master of the universe, if it is pleasing to you, do not give over that man, meaning as a euphemism for himself, and his kingdom, into the hands of only one man. This is the rabbinic imagination, right? I mean, is this what the emperor actually said? The Roman emperor is praying to the God of the universe and saying, don't let the Roman Empire be delivered into the hands of one Jewish hero, sort of like a Samson type of character, this man Bar Deroma. In the end, it was the words issuing from his own mouth, Bar Deroma's own mouth, that caused him to stumble. as he uttered this verse in complaint against God. Have you not rejected us, O God, so that you go not forth, O God, with our hosts? And the Gemara asks, but this is a question that King David asked in Psalm 60, verse 12. So David asked this question. What's so bad about Bar Deroma asking this question? And the Gemara answers, David uttered these words as a question, wondering whether they were true, whereas Bar Deroma pronounced them as a statement of fact. So in other words, it's not that the Roman emperor prayed to the God of the universe and said, help me out, so that Rome isn't delivered into the hands of this one Jewish hero. His prayer was not answered. He was an idolater most of the time, even if he did ask this question. But Bar Deroma himself, acting as the leader of the Jewish people in that region, despaired and said, God has abandoned us. Not, has God abandoned us? The way King David might have asked. But he just said, God has abandoned us. And that is, a heretical statement. And this defeated him. The Gemara recounts what happened to Bar Deroma. He entered an outhouse, right? Since he had spoken against God and declared that God had abandoned the Jewish people, which God said he would never do. So Bar Deroma entered an outhouse, right? He was going, he's going number 2 in the bathroom. And a snake came and eviscerated him and he died. The emperor said, since a miracle was performed for me as I had no part in Bar Deroma's death, I will let the rest of the people be this time and take no further action against the Jews. So he let them be and he went on his way. And what did the Jewish people do in that region? They leapt about, they jumped about, they ate and drank and lit many candles in celebration that the image, Bilyona, imprinted on a seal, Gushpanka, was visible from a distance of a mile. And the emperor then said, the Jews are rejoicing over me. So he went back and came against them, right? Their initial rage that they gave into when the rooster and the chicken had been taken away by Roman soldiers from a wedding, that was ill-conceived. And their overdone celebrations when it seemed like, the Roman emperor decided to let them be and went on his way. They were like, we defeated Rome. We defeated Rome. Ill-conceived celebration. Rav Asi says, 300,000 men with drawn swords entered the king's mountain and massacred its inhabitants for 3 days and 3 nights. And at the same time, on the other side of the mountain, weddings and other festivities continued to be celebrated as the people in that region didn't know about the people in this region owing to the enormous size of the two regions. Concerning the verse, the Lord has swallowed up without pity all the habitations of Jacob, Lamentations 2:2. It is related that when Ravin came from the land of Israel to Babylonia, he said that Rabbi Yochanan says, this is referring to the 600,000 cities that King Yanai had in the king's mountain, this region. As Rav Yehuda says, that Rav Asi says, King Yanai had 600,000 cities in the king's mountain, and each of them had a population as great as the number of those who left Egypt, except for 3 of those cities, the population of which was double the number of those who left Egypt. And these are those 3 cities, Kefar Bish, Kefar Shechalayim, and Kefar Dekaria. And the Gemara explains the meaning of these place names. Kefar Bish is evil town and was called by that name because its inhabitants would not open their houses to guests. Kefar Shechalayim was referred to by that name because their livelihood was derived from the cultivation of cress. And as for Kefar Dekaria, the town of Malis, Rabbi Yochanan says their women would first give birth to boys and afterward give birth to girls, and then they would stop having children. Ula said, I myself saw that place, and it could not hold even 600,000 reeds, all the more so that number of people. A certain heretic said to Rabbi Hanina, you lie with your exorbitant exaggerations. Rabbi Hanina said to him, with regard to Eretz Yisrael, it is written, land of the deer. See Jeremiah 3:19. And just as the skin of a deer cannot hold its flesh, for after the animal is skinned, its hide shrinks, so too with regard to Eretz Yisrael, when it is settled, it expands. But when it is not settled, it contracts. And this explains how a place that is so small today could have been so highly populated prior to the temple's destruction. And we should not be so like, oh, that's crazy. this actually makes a lot of sense. If you think about how many Jews went into Egypt, right? Jacob's family, 70 people. And how many came out and were present at Mount Sinai? 600,000 men, 2 million total population. Some say 3 million. How did they grow that fast? Because that was a time when God desired that the people would grow and the population would swell very fast. And so the slaves in Egypt, and that was part of the reason why the Egyptians were so concerned, because the Jewish population was growing so fast. So if it could grow that fast in Egypt, it could certainly grow that fast in the land of milk and honey. And we have the same idea that when the Messiah comes, when Mashiach comes, and all the Jews, are taken to Israel, and there's resurrection of the dead, and all the Jews throughout history come back, are in Israel, it's going to be this enormous number of people. How could they all fit there? Because at that time, we're talking about a time of miracles, and God can do whatever God wants. And he can certainly make the promised land, the land of milk and honey, stretch as much as it needs to hold as many people as God desires that should be there. The Gemara relates that Rav Minyumi bar Hilkiah, Rav Hilkiah bar Tovia, and Rav Huna bar Chia were once sitting together, and they said, if there is someone who has heard anything about Kfar Shechania of Egypt, which was in that region, let him relate it. So one of them began a discussion and said there was an incident involving a betrothed man and woman from there who were taken captive by Gentiles, and the Gentiles married them off to each other. And the woman said to the man, please do not touch me, as I do not have a marriage contract from you. And it is prohibited for us to live together without one. And until the day of his death, the man did not touch the woman. Now, this is fascinating, right? So what happened here is that you had a Jewish man and a Jewish woman who were taken as slaves by non-Jews. The non-Jews sought to breed the man and the woman, right, and produce more slaves, their children. She was an incredibly righteous woman who said, look, you and I are permitted to marry each other, but since we're slaves and we are not able to create the marriage contract between us, right? There's no scribe here. There's no legal, mechanism for us to have a ketubah drawn up for us. Well, the sages said that in the absence of a ketubah, in the absence of a written marriage contract, a Jewish man and a Jewish woman cannot be married to each other. Since we're not legally married, we can't sleep together. And he said, you're right. And so even though they were made to sleep in a bed together, they, restrained themselves they had physical desire for each other, but their dedication to God and Torah mitzvahs was greater, and so they restrained themselves. And when this man died without having touched the woman said to the sages, eulogize this man who conquered his passion even more than Joseph, right? Joseph in the coat of many colors. As in the case of Joseph, it was only for a short time that he had to overpower his inclination and resist Potiphar's wife who was trying to seduce him. See Genesis 39. Whereas this man struggled with his passion each and every day. Furthermore, Joseph was not in one bed with Potiphar's wife, whereas this man was in one bed with his wife. And in addition, with Joseph, the woman was not his wife, whereas this man was with his wife, as she was already betrothed to him. Anyone would have understood if they said, under these circumstances, we really are man and wife. We could just be together. But they were very righteous and said, in the absence of a ketubah, we won't. And so they were heroic. Another sage began his remarks about that region where the people were understood to be righteous and said, it once happened that the market price of 40 sa, this large volume of grain, stood at 1 dinar, right? So the wheat was very cheap. And then the rate went down 1 sa, modea, so that only 39 sa were sold for a dinar. And they checked to see what sin had caused this, and they found a father and son who had engaged in sexual intercourse with a betrothed young woman on Yom Kippur, and they brought the offenders to court and stoned them, and the rate returned to its former level. So this goes to illustrate, what kind of a lost world we live in, right? where, the righteousness of the world is so low that we can't even fathom this. What we're being told here is that there was a region, right, where everyone was living at such a righteous level, following the laws it was meant to be followed, that when you have that, the people were at peace, and prices were utterly stable. And when prices fluctuated, they said, oh, something's wrong. Somebody must have committed a sin. They investigate, and they found that indeed this father and son slept with the same woman, and they did it on Yom Kippur. Certainly an offense punishable by stoning, although they didn't receive the warning, so that's interesting. But in this case, it was a danger to the society, so they removed those people from the society, and then the prices went back to utter stability. Yet another sage began his remarks and said there was an incident there involving a man who set his eyes upon his wife to divorce her. But her marriage contract was large, and he wished to avoid having to pay it. What did he do? He went and invited his friends, gave them food and drink, made them drunk, and lay his friends and his wife in one bed. He brought the white of an egg, which has the appearance of semen, and placed it on the sheet between them. And he then stood witnesses over them so that they could offer testimony. And he went to court claiming that his wife had committed adultery, right? Utter lie, utter setup. He's framing his wife as an adulterer so that he doesn't have to pay her this large marriage contract that he would have to pay if he divorces her. This guy's an absolute liar and a con man. So a certain elder of the disciples of Shammai the elder was there, and his name was Bava ben Buta. And he said to them, this is the tradition that I received from Shammai the elder. Egg white on a bed sheet contracts and hardens when heated by fire, whereas semen is absorbed into the sheet by the fire. And they checked the matter and found, in accordance with his statement, that the substance on the sheet was not semen but egg white. They then brought the husband to court, administered lashes to him, and made him pay his wife's marriage contract in full. Right? I wonder if they could have punished him even more than that, since he's trying to frame his wife as an adulterer. That's a death penalty offense. He might have deserved to get the death penalty for what he sought to do to his own wife. But at any rate, I think this story is being brought to show that the righteousness of that region was so high that even when these little matters erupted, the people could find it. They could create justice, right? They weren't tricked by these, clever con men. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, but since those in the city were so righteous, what is the reason that they were punished and destroyed? And Rav Yosef said to him, it is because they did not mourn for Jerusalem. As it is written, rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad with her, all you that love her. Rejoice with joy with her, all you that did mourn for her. And the verse teaches that one who mourns for Jerusalem will rejoice in its rebuilding, and one who fails to mourn for Jerusalem is destroyed. And so now we're getting the picture that this incredibly righteous region was sort of removed from the war that took place in Jerusalem. And these people said, well, that was really a shame for the people who live in Jerusalem, but hey, we're living at a righteous level. What we're doing is good and virtuous. And so they didn't feel connected to the destruction in Jerusalem. They didn't take it personally. And because of that, they merited the same fate as the Jews met in Jerusalem. Right? And so this is a teaching for us, right? All Jews, we're in that same boat together. And we've seen this teaching many times. Those who cry for Jerusalem, and that's very apt right now during the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av when Jerusalem was destroyed, right? Those who mourn for the loss of Jerusalem, who take it personally, who cry for that loss, will merit to see it rebuilt, right? Merit to see the third temple built. It was stated earlier, the third example of Rabbi Yochanan, who said, right, the tremendous tragedy arose from little things. It was stated earlier that the city of Beitar was destroyed on account of a shaft from a carriage. The Gemara explains that it was customary in Beitar that when a boy was born, they would plant a cedar tree, and when a girl was born, they would plant a cypress. And when they would later marry each other, they would cut down these trees and construct a wedding canopy for them from the branches. One day, the emperor's daughter passed by this area, Beitar, and the shaft of the carriage of the emperor's daughter broke. And her attendants chopped down a cedar from among those trees which were nearby and brought it to her to fix the carriage. Owing to the importance that the locals of Beitar attached to their custom, right, that this cedar that the Romans cut down was meant to be the cedar of a particular boy, that when he would get married, they would make the chuppah, the wedding canopy, out of that tree, and now this little troop of Romans cut it down just to fix a carriage. The locals came and fell upon the Romans and beat them. And the attendants came and said to the emperor, "The Jews have rebelled against you." The emperor then came against them in war. So what we're seeing here is there was already the war in Jerusalem, and then there was another war in that area of the King's Mountain, and now there's going to be yet another war and destruction in Beitar, right? So it's a period of wars, and so again, these people were hot-headed and should have been smarter about not going up against the Romans. At a time of disfavor against the Jews. The last thing you're going to do is go challenge the most powerful army in the world. And it was in connection with the war that ensued that the sages expounded the following verse. He has cut off in his fierce anger all the horn of Israel. Lamentations 2:3. And Rabbi Zeir, and we'll be reading Lamentations on Tisha B'Av in a couple weeks. And Rabbi Zeir says that Rabbi Bahu says that Rabbi Yochanan says, these are the 80,000 officers bearing battle trumpets in their hands who entered the city of Beitar when the enemy took it and killed men, women, and children until their blood flowed into the great sea. And lest you say that the city was close to the sea, know that it was a mile away, right? So the slaughter of innocent people in Beitar by the Romans produced so much blood that it flowed a mile until it reached the sea. And it is similarly taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer the Great says there are two rivers in the Yadayim Valley in that region, one flowing one way and one flowing the other way. And the sages estimated that in the aftermath of this war, these rivers were filled with 2 parts water to 1 part blood. And likewise, it was taught in a Baraisa for 7 years the Gentiles harvested their vineyards that had been soaked with blood of Israel without requiring any additional fertilizer. Again, it was taught in a Baraisa for 7 years the Gentiles harvested their vineyards in that region of Beitar without need of fertilizer because that soil had been soaked with the blood of so many Jews that were murdered. Now we're on 57b. With regard to the Babylonian exile, which followed the destruction of the first temple. Rabbi Chia bar Avin says that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha says, an old man came from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem and related to me, in this valley that lies before you, Nebazaridan, captain of the guard of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, killed 2,110,000 people. And in Jerusalem itself, he killed 940,000 people on one stone, until the blood of his victims flowed and touched the blood of Zechariah to fulfill what is stated, and blood touches blood. The Gemara clarifies the details of what happened. Nebazaridan, the general who destroyed the first temple for the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. Nebazaridan found the blood of Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest, and saw that it was bubbling up from the ground. And he said, "What is this?" And those in the temple said to him, "It is sacrificial blood that has been poured there." He brought animal blood, compared it to the blood bubbling up from the ground, and saw that it was not similar to that blood. Nebazaridan said to them, "If you tell me whose blood this is, it will be well for you. But if not, I will comb your flesh with iron combs." They said to him, "What shall we say to you? He was a prophet among us," Zechariah the prophet, "who used to rebuke us about heavenly matters. And we didn't listen to him. In fact, we rose up against him." Right? The prophet tried to tell them, if you keep acting the way you're doing, murder, idolatry, licentiousness, you're going to lose the temple. And what did they do? They killed the prophet who was telling them the truth. So the people admitted that, right? What shall we say to you? He was a prophet among us, and he used to rebuke us about heavenly matters, and we rose up against him, and we killed him. 2 Chronicles 24:20. And for many years now, his blood has not settled. Nebazaridan said to them, I will appease Zechariah. And he brought the members of the great Sanhedrin and of a lesser Sanhedrin and killed them alongside the bubbling blood. But still it did not settle. In other words, Nebazaridan is setting himself up as God's instrument of punishment for the Jews who would not listen to their own prophet. And he's saying, okay, well, I'll finish the job that I apparently was sent to do. And so he starts killing the sages, because it should have been the sages who would listen to the prophet, and apparently they didn't. But still Zechariah's blood did not settle. And so then Nebazaridan brought young men and virgins and killed them alongside the pool of blood. But still it did not settle. And then he brought school children and killed them alongside it. But still it did not settle. And finally Nebazaridan said, Zechariah, I have killed the best of them. Would it please you if I destroyed them all, wiped out the Jews from the world? And when he said this, the blood at last settled. At that moment, Nebazaridan contemplated the idea of repentance and said to himself, if for the death of one soul, meaning that of Zechariah, God punishes the Jewish people in this manner, then that man, which is to say him, Nebazaridan, who has killed all of those souls, all the more so will I be subject to great punishment from God. So Nebazaridan fled, and he sent to his house a document detailing what was to be done with his property, and he converted to Judaism. A sage taught a baraisa relating to this matter. Naaman, commander of the army of King Aram, 2 Kings chapter 5. Naaman was not a convert, as he did not accept all of the commandments, but rather he was a ger toshav, a Gentile who resides in the land of Israel and observes the 7 Noahide mitzvahs. Nebazaridan, by contrast, was a convert, as it was explained previously. Now the Gemara adds that some of Haman from the book of Esther, right, Haman, some of Haman's descendants studied Torah in Bnei Barak. And some of Sisera's descendants taught children Torah in Jerusalem. And some of Sennacherib's descendants taught Torah in public, right? Sennacherib was the king who destroyed the northern kingdom and exiled the 10 lost tribes. And who are these descendants of Sennacherib, right? This great enemy of the Jewish people, whose descendants became Jews. And who are they? They're Shammai and Avtalyon, the teachers of Hillel the elder. And by the way, even in modern times, we see this phenomenon. I myself have met a person who is German and whose, I don't know, his father or grandfather was a Nazi who persecuted Jews. And this German, I can't remember if it's the child or the grandchild, converted to Judaism. And that story is definitely not unique. As for the incident involving the blood of Zechariah, this is alluded to by that which is written, I have set her blood upon the bare rock that it should not be covered. Apropos its discussion of the destruction of the temple and the calamities that befell Israel, the Gemara cites a verse. The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Who said that? Isaac, right? When Jacob comes wearing, sheepskin on his forearms, to get the blessing that Isaac would have given to Esau, but he gave to Jacob instead. And Jacob was prodded in doing this to fool his nearly blind father by his own mother, right? Isaac's wife, Rebekah. Because she knew, and really Isaac knew, that the blessing needed to go to Jacob and not Esau. Right? So the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Genesis 27:22, which the sages expounded as relating to Jewish history, or much later than when Isaac did it, right? But this could be expounded as relating to later Jewish history. The voice, this is the cry stirred up by the Emperor Hadrian, who caused the Jewish people to cry out when he killed 600,000 on 600,000, meaning 1.2 million people in Alexandria of Egypt, twice the number of men who left Egypt. And the voice of Jacob, this is the cry aroused by the Emperor Vespasian, who killed 4 million people in the city of Beitar. and some say he killed 40 million people. And the hands are the hands of Esau. This is the wicked kingdom of Rome that destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land. Alternatively, the voice is the voice of Jacob means that no prayer is effective in the world unless some member of the seed of Jacob has a part in it. The second clause in the verse, and the hands are the hands of Esau, means that no war grants victory unless some member of the seed of Esau has a part in it. And this is what Rabbi Lazar says. The verse that says, you shall be hid from the scourge of the tongue, Job 5:21, means you shall need to hide on account of quarrels provoked by the tongue. Rabbi Yehuda says that Rav says, what is the meaning of that which is written by the rivers of Babylon? There we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. Right? Psalm 137, verse 1, famously sung by Bob Marley and by Sublime. Right? And this teaches that the Holy One, blessed be He, showed David the destruction of the first temple and the destruction of the second temple. And he saw the destruction of the first temple, as it is stated, by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat down and wept. And he saw the destruction of the second temple, as it is written later in the same psalm, remember, O Lord, against the children of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, when they said, raise it to its very foundation, as the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, who are the children of Edom. Right? King David was also a prophet, and he was shown what the future held for his kingdom. Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says, and some say that it was Rabbi Ami who says this, and some say that it was taught in a Baraisa, there was an incident involving 400 boys and girls who were taken as captives for the purpose of prostitution. Same kind of tragic, child sex slavery that even goes on today. These children sensed on their own that what they were expected to do, and they said, if we commit suicide and drown in the sea, will we come to eternal life in the world to come? The oldest child among them expounded the verse. The Lord said, I will bring back from Bashan, I will bring them back from the depths of the sea. I will bring them back from Bashan. This means from between the teeth, Bain Shen, of the lion. I will bring them back from the depths of the sea is referring to those who drown in the sea for the sake of heaven. When the girls heard this, they all jumped out of the boat and fell into the sea. The boys then drew a Kal V'chomer inference with regard to themselves and said, if these girls, for whom sexual intercourse with men is their natural way, act in such a manner, then we, for whom sexual intercourse with men is not our natural way, should all the more so conduct ourselves likewise. And they too jumped into the sea. And concerning them and others like them, the verse states, as for your sake we are killed all day long, we are reckoned as sheep for the slaughter. Psalm 44:23. And Rav Yehuda said this verse applies to the woman and her 7 sons who died as martyrs for the sake of the sanctification of God's name. And the incident occurred as follows. They brought in the first of the woman's sons before the emperor and said to him, worship the idol. And he said to them, I cannot do so, as it is written in the Torah, I am the Lord your God. So they immediately took him out and killed him. And then they brought in the second son, right? So a woman has 7 sons. Her first son was killed because he wouldn't bow to an idol. They brought in the second son. They told him, worship the idol. He said, I can't do it. It is written in the Torah, you shall have no other gods beside me. And so they took him out and killed him. Then they brought in the third son. They told him to worship the idol. He said, I can't do it because it says in the Torah, he that sacrifices to any god, save the Lord, he shall be utterly destroyed. So they killed him. Then they brought the fourth son. They said to him, worship the idol. He said, I can't do it because it says in the Torah, you shall not bow down to any other god. And so they killed him. They then brought in yet another son and said to him, worship the idol. He said to them, I cannot do so, as it is written in the Torah. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And so they killed him. They brought in another son and said to him, worship the idol. He said, no, because it is written in the Torah, know therefore this today and consider it in your heart that the Lord, he is God in heaven above and upon the earth beneath, there is no other. And so they took him out and killed him. They then brought in yet another son and said to him, worship the idol. He said, I cannot do so because it says in the Torah, you have avouched the Lord this day to be your God, and the Lord has avouched you this day to be a people for his own possession. We already took an oath to the Holy One, blessed be he, that we will not exchange him for a different God, and he too has taken an oath to us that he will not exchange us for another man. There was only one son left of this poor mother. It was the youngest brother who had said this, and the emperor pitied him. Seeking a way, they didn't kill him. That's what the youngest brother said. So the emperor pitied him. He didn't want to kill all 7 sons of the same woman. He's like, he can't believe that these Jews are so stubborn that just because they refuse to bow down to an idol like every other Roman of the millions and millions of Romans, but the Jew won't do it, and now he's had to kill 6 of the 7 sons. So now the emperor's like, all right, let's just find a way to spare the last son. So the emperor said to the 7th son, I will throw down my seal before you. Just bend over and pick it up so that people will say that he has accepted the king's authority. The boy said to him, woe, Chaval, woe to you, Caesar. Woe to you, Caesar. If you think that for the sake of your honor, I should fulfill your command and do this, then for the sake of the honor of the Holy One, blessed be he, all the more so should I fulfill his command. And as they were taking the last son out to be killed, his mother said to them, give him to me so that I may give him a small kiss. And she said to him, my son, go and say to your father Abraham, you bound 1 son to the altar, but I bound 7 altars. She too in the end went up to the roof, fell and died. A divine voice emerged and said, a joyful mother of children. Psalm 113 verse 9. How can you call her a joyful mother of children? Because she raised her children to be devoted in their service of God. Is there anything joyful about this terrible, terrible story? Only if you can imagine that we're in no hurry to leave this world. Only in this world can we fulfill the Torah and perform the commandments that we're obligated to perform while we are here. But our purpose in this world is to serve God. And if we do so to the best of our ability, despite making many mistakes because we're human, then we have a place in the world to come. And, how long are we to live in this world? We have a very long life, 100 years, 120 years. What is that alongside eternity? So these boys, who martyred themselves to fulfill God's will in this world, you can imagine that family has an exalted place in the world to come. And for the sacrifice that they made during their brief journey through this world, they will merit to have an eternity of bliss and joy and close proximity to the Holy One above. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says concerning the verse, for your sake we are killed all the day long, Psalm 44:23, that this is referring to circumcision, which was given for the 8th day, as the blood of our newborn sons is spilled for the sake of the covenant with God. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says the verse was stated in reference to Torah scholars who demonstrate the laws of slaughter on themselves, meaning that they demonstrate on their own bodies how ritual slaughter should be performed and occasionally injure themselves in the process. And this is, as Rava says, a person may demonstrate anything using himself to illustrate the act except for slaughter and another matter, which is a euphemism for sexual intercourse. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, these people in the verse are not people who are actually slaughtered, nor people who accidentally nick themselves when they're learning the laws of slaughter, but rather this is not to be taken literally. This is a metaphor. These people in the verse, right, who are killed all day long, right, for your sake, for God's sake, they are killed all day long. Who does this refer to? According to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, the people in this verse are Torah scholars who kill themselves over the words of Torah, meaning they just study 20 hours a day. In accordance with the statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, as Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, the words of Torah endure only for one who kills himself over them. Not literally, not suicide, but he just toils in them. As it is stated, this is the Torah when a man dies in a tent. And Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says 40 sa of tefillin boxes were found on the heads of those killed in Beitar. Rabbi Yanai, the son of Rabbi Yishmael, says there were found 3 large baskets, each containing 40 sa of tefillin boxes. And it was Tana Baraisa, there were 40 large baskets containing 3 sa. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, get them in. We're actually at the top of 58a now. And the Gemara notes, and these sages do not disagree. This sage is referring to the tefillin of the head, whereas this sage is referring to the tefillin of the arm. For owing to the different manners in which they are fashioned, they are also different in size. And Rabbi Asi says 4 kav of brains from children whose skulls were smashed were found on one stone. And Ula says 9 kav. And Rav Kahana says, and some say it was Sheila Bar Mari who said, what is the verse from which this is derived? Quote, O daughter of Babylon, marked for devastation, happy is he who shall repay you your recompense for what you have done to us. Happy is he who shall seize and dash your little ones against the rock. Psalm 137, verses 8 and 9. Sorry to be so grim to relate these catastrophes in Jewish history, but of all times of the year to have come upon this page in our 7.5-year journey through the Talmud, now in the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av is the perfect time to be reading such tales. Okay, the hour is definitely late. I'll just take a couple of questions on Gittin 57. Nina says, I think the class was so riveting that there aren't any questions. So Michelle says, so as I understand, Yeshua is a different name than Yeshu. Sometimes there just isn't anything in the English language that even comes close to what the meaning is in the original Hebrew. Yeah, I mean, right, you know, these names, you know, sometimes Jesse, Yeshu, Yeshua, Yehoshua, the names are all kind of similar. Usually Yehoshua is Joshua. Yeshua, the word means salvation, but sometimes it can be a name. And Yeshu here in the Koran Talmud is translated as Jesus. But as we see, the Yeshu HaNotzri mentioned here lived, you know, quite a few years before the Jesus who became associated with the Christian religion. So we're not referring to that historical figure. Sam Richardson, thank you, Sal, for helping to make the 3 weeks even more meaningful. Thank you, and may we all merit to see the rebuilding of the temple, right? May we all merit to witness the coming of Mashiach and the building of the temple, and maybe soon, maybe we won't even have Tisha B'Av this year, right? Because, I mean, when the Messiah comes, it'll happen fast, right? We'll enter the Messianic age fast. The third temple it won't take years to build like the first or second temple. God will build it, so it'll go up fast, like instant. And then Tisha B'Av in 2 weeks, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, will become one of the happiest days in the Jewish calendar. And the tradition says, why will it become so happy? Because when we commemorate that day and all these unspeakable tragedies like we read about today in Jewish history, which, you know, we have all these interpretations, and we have some sense that, you know, in the afterlife, in the world to come, and in the Messianic age, when there's resurrection of the dead, you know, there will be an accounting, and you know, everyone will be rewarded for the good that they did and held accountable for the sins that they committed. We don't know exactly how all that's going to play out. Some say it'll be entirely miraculous, you know, it'd be like, you know, sunshine and rainbows everywhere, like the physical world will be entirely transformed. Maimonides says, no, the world will look like the world looks now, but justice will prevail in a way that it can't before the Messianic age. But at any rate, what we believe with all our heart and soul is that when that day comes, then, and not before then, we will understand exactly what God had in mind, right, throughout this painful history. Until then, we guess, we hope, we have faith, we count on God, but we can't actually understand because it hasn't been shown to us, hasn't been revealed to us so that we can see it, right? And our sages teach that when the Messianic age comes, right, and then the teaching is, and the world will be as filled with the knowledge of God as the water fills the sea. And what that means is that it will be revealed to all of us, right? That God created the world, that God runs the world, that God has been, you know, arranging history throughout all time with a specific goal in mind. Then we won't have to take it as a matter of faith. We'll all see it. We'll all understand it. But until then, we can't understand it. We just have faith that God is good, that God is in charge, that God sees everything. and that God has a plan. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, late, when Shabbos ends here in LA. I've been lately getting on the air at like 9:30 pretty much. And now, by the way, Shabbos is starting to end earlier and earlier. We've already had the longest Shabbos of the year, or the latest Shabbos of the year. And so now candle lighting and the end of Shabbos is starting to just a little bit go earlier and earlier and earlier. But for instance, candle lighting last week, I think, was 7:49 p.m. in LA, and this week it's 7:47 p.m. And as we get further and further away from the summer solstice, it'll get earlier and earlier at a faster rate. All the best.